Sunday, July 15, 2018, 11:22 a.m., Table Rock Lake, Missouri. 8 adults stepped off the dock into a rented 24-foot runabout, laughing, squinting at the glare, promising to be back by nightfall. By noon, phone photos stopped. By dusk, the water went quiet. What happened to Ryan Calder, 25, who had been tracking strange insurance claims before this trip? His brother, Mark, noted the last clean timestamp, then the gap that felt like a closed door. 5 years later, something would look back from the sky and point down. But that afternoon, the lake kept its face. No oil bloom, no flare, no radio crackle. A smile froze in a camera roll. And the water forgot to speak. The day had started like a postcard, heat mirage, skiffs cutting neat seams, the smell of sunscreen and gasoline. Their boat took on coolers of ice, a duffel with extra life vests, a Bluetooth speaker wrapped in a towel. Ryan checked the fuel gauge, the simple things pilots of small craft never ignore. He joked with Olivia about sunburns. He texted Mark a photo of the cove they planned to anchor in. In the picture, he looked older than the last time they'd fished together, but still the kid brother who asked too many questions and never let a loose thread lie. By 3:10 p.m., clouds stacked low and far off. Not a threat, just texture. A rental clerk later swore the weather log matched the buoy data. No advisory. No whitecaps on the wind graph. The marina ledger showed 8 adults, all over 22, all competent swimmers, all signing the waiver no one reads. A fact doesn't care if you sign it. It just waits. At 6:40, Mark's phone buzzed with a routine robocall. He declined it, then noticed nothing else arrived. No sunset selfie from the bluffs. No headed-in message he could pin and exhale to. At 8:03, he called Ryan and landed in voicemail that still said, "Hey, it's me." At 9:11, the marina called Mark back, voice tight but professional. The boat had missed its return window. "Could be a dead battery," the clerk said. "They probably tied up in a cove." Mark stared at the fridge where their mother kept clipped recipes and emergency numbers. He put the phone on speaker, dialed the sheriff's office, and listened to the line stack its tones like railroad ties. Search began before midnight. Deputies swept the main channels with spotlights. A state patrol helicopter traced ribbons of light over the arms of the lake. A rescue team worked the likely trouble points first: rocks that broke the surface, narrow chutes where engines cavitate, the place where people cut corners because everyone does. The night gave them nothing. Near sunrise, they dragged a small grid and pulled up branches, a snapped lure, a plastic lawn chair that had blown from a dock 3 coves over. No hull. No cooler. No scraps of fiberglass floating like torn fingernails. If a boat breaks, it tells on itself. This one kept quiet. Mark waited on the shoreline with a thermos and a notepad he didn't remember packing. He wrote times, contacts, the name of the pilot in the helicopter, even the fuel used in the patrol boat, anything to pretend the world still ran on inputs and outputs. He stared at the marina clock, at the weather station blinking normal. He watched tourists arrive with vacation smiles that slid away when they saw the emergency lights. He saw a boy tug on his father's sleeve and point at the boat slips and then looked away fast because in his family there were no children left to point at anything. By afternoon, Sheriff Anita Collins stood in front of the whiteboard and drew 3 clean lines: route out, expected route back, search corridor. She spoke in sentences that carried weight without drama. She explained drift models, human factors, error margins. She kept the room cool. She promised a wide net and a measured mind. When Mark's voice tried to climb, she met it with steady ground. He liked her for that. He needed someone who didn't tremble. Friends arrived in waves. Ben's sister brought a stack of printed photos, as if paper could anchor faces to a surface. Tasha's cousin handed over a medication list. Harper's roommate remembered a call the night before about extra sunscreen. None of it mattered in the way they wanted it to. It mattered in the way a mosaic matters when you step back far enough to stop looking for a single missing tile. Night 2, divers briefed on visibility. The lake takes light and eats it. They descended with measured breath, took bearings, moved in arcs. They found old anchors, a rusted ladder, a cache of beer cans that told stories about summer but not this summer. The sonar crew marked 3 anomalies, all of them shrugged off by morning as rock shelves. If the lake was a chessboard, someone had flipped it and walked away without sound. The 3rd day felt like grief learning to sit. The 4th felt like an office you return to after a funeral, where the chair still remembers your weight. The 5th made Mark angry at the air for carrying on. On the 7th, the sheriff scaled back active search and moved to investigative posture. That phrase landed like a lid. Mark changed shape around the absence. He started waking at 4:30, pulled down public databases, taught himself how to read salvage reports and insurance codes, how to cross-reference registrations against weather that never misbehaved. He logged odd claims that rhymed with Ryan's notes, boats reported stolen in good conditions, recoveries handled by the same licensed operator out of a shell address. He brewed black coffee and didn't sweeten it. He stopped answering calls that began with apology and ended with prayer. He spoke to the lake the way men speak to hard ground. He said, "Tell me what you took." 2 summers turned into 3. In the 5th, a stranger misdialed him at dawn and said, "Is this the guy who keeps asking about missing boats?" Mark almost hung up. Then the voice added a place north of the park boundary and a phrase he wasn't ready for. "From above, it looks like someone's been arranging them." He wrote the coordinates twice, then a 3rd time, because his hand was shaking. He stepped outside with the phone still to his ear. The water was calm. It didn't blink. The lake had learned to hide in plain sight. Mark was about to learn where it practiced. Evan Brooks didn't mean to find anything. He was mapping shoreline damage for the county after a busy holiday weekend, flying a consumer drone with a survey app and a sun-faded caution sticker on the controller. Mid-morning, the Ozark haze lifted. Pine ridges sharpened. The drone skimmed north of the state park boundary, into reed beds most boats avoid because they swallow props and patience. The screen showed ordinary water. Then the water turned geometric. Buttocks. Pale ribs. Clean angles where there shouldn't be any. Evan stopped recording, then started again, a habit born of small superstitions. He tilted the camera and the pattern resolved into dozens of hulls set in loose rows, some half sunk, some just below the surface like sleeping animals. It looked curated. It looked wrong. He tagged the GPS and shut everything down because his hands had begun to shake. Mark arrived 40 minutes later, gray ball cap, cracked thermos, eyes that hadn't learned how to close. Evan pulled up the feed on a laptop propped by a jar of screws. Mark didn't sit. He bent at the waist, bracing his palms on the workbench as the screen filled with that strange underwater orchard. The drone hovered above what could have been a parking lot for ghosts. When Evan zoomed to the center, a 24-foot runabout with faded blue trim appeared out of algae green. The registration numbers were a smear, but the dent by the bow rail wasn't. Mark exhaled through his teeth like he'd touched a live wire. "That's it," he said, and his voice didn't marvel or plead. It just named. Sheriff Anita Collins met them at the marina with 2 deputies and a patrol boat that smelled like rope and diesel. She listened to Evan explain restricted zones and drift, then she leaned over the laptop, practical and steady, and asked for exact coordinates twice to make sure she would remember them when batteries failed. She radioed a 2nd unit to the north shoreline. She called the state conservation office for a biologist who knew the marsh channels better than any map. She asked Evan to keep the footage quiet. He nodded because the fear had a shape now and it looked like a row of boats arranged by a patient hand. The ride out felt like trespass. Wind pushed spray into Mark's mouth and he tasted metal. The reed wall opened at a seam only locals use in low water. Inside, the cove went silent. No chop, no wake. The marsh absorbed noise the way grief absorbs good news. The first hull surfaced off the bow, pale like bone. Then another, tipped so its rub rail held an inch below the meniscus. Collins cut the engine and they drifted. The boats sat where someone had placed them, aligned with a soft geometry that obeyed a logic none of them liked. They found the runabout near the center, caught in milfoil and slick as if it had been washed. Collins gave orders in a low voice. Close. Photos before touch. Document everything twice. Mark climbed in with permission and care. He moved like a tech in a clean room. The cockpit held a shallow tea of water, reeds, and insect husks. Under the aft bench, a cooler wedged sideways. He levered it free and the lid stuck, then surrendered. Inside lay a waterproof pouch. The zip seal had clouded, but the phone inside was unmistakable. A bright case with a lake sticker. Oblivious. Collins took custody, bagged it, labeled the time, and handed it to the deputy who would not take his eyes off the chain of evidence form. Mark kept going because stopping would mean thinking. Under the port console, his fingers brushed plastic edges. He worked around a tangle of cables and freed a black square the size of a matchbox with a scuffed magnetic foot. He didn't need a manufacturer label to know what it was. He looked up at Collins. She didn't nod, didn't frown. She said, "Photograph it in place," and he put it back long enough to capture what mattered. On the starboard side, near the bilge access, he saw lines scratched into gel coat and almost missed them under the moss. For letters. Uneven, deliberate. He reached for his camera and his hands failed him. He tried again, slower. Detective Randall Pierce waded over from the other skiff, pants soaked to the thigh, badge clipped to a pocket he'd forgotten to close. He was older than Mark remembered from that first week in 2018, eyelids heavier, laugh lines drawn like pencil marks someone pushed too hard. He studied the word under the slime, then turned his face to the marsh like he could smell whoever had carved it. "Could be old," he said. "Kids do things." Collins didn't look up. "Kids don't arrange 100 boats," she said, and kept writing. They eased the runabout out of the weeds and into open water on lines, gentle as pallbearers. The sonar team swept the grid beyond the cove. The screen returned clean returns and occasional shadows that made everyone blink harder. A conservation officer pointed out the only channel deep enough for towing in from the main lake without scraping. Collins marked it on a paper chart and then on her palm with a pen, as if paper might betray them. She kept her voice even, but Mark heard a new timbre, the sound of someone building a case in real time, stacking facts like bricks around a space where a person might stand. At the dock, a mobile tech unit unpacked dryers and cables. A specialist named Maya Chen took Olivia's phone the way a nurse takes a newborn, eyes already calculating water intrusion and power safety. She glanced at the case sticker and then at Mark and said, softly, "If the seal held, we have a shot." The words did not promise. They permitted hope to sit in the room without knocking anything over. As the boatyard gathered to watch without admitting they were watching, a county pickup rolled in slow. A man stepped out in a crisp shirt with Ozark Marine Recovery stitched above the pocket like a polite introduction. He stood at the edge of the crowd and smiled at no one in particular. Mark recognized the logo from late-night searches and felt his ribcage tighten. The man's hands were very clean. He did not ask a single question. When Evan pulled Mark aside, he didn't bother lowering his voice. "There were fewer boats when we left the garage," he said. "I scrubbed through the cache. Somebody's already moving them." Maya Chen set the phone on an anti-static mat and breathed once, evenly, as if oxygen were something you could measure and ration. She opened the case, rinsed mineral haze with lab-grade alcohol, then slid the device into a cradle that fed it the smallest possible current. No rush. No heroics. She coaxed it awake, not to boot but to give up what it remembered. Outside, the marina hummed. Inside the tech van was the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own pulse. Mark stood beside the door with his arms crossed, a posture he used when he wanted to hold his ribs together. Sheriff Collins chose the opposite corner and let the silence work for her. On the monitor, a directory tree unfolded. Maya didn't react when thumbnails populated, just log times. 11:23 a.m., 1:05 p.m., 2:18 p.m., then a skip to 3:47 p.m. The first frames were exactly what grief hates. People alive in ordinary ways. Olivia's open-mouthed smile, Ben flicking water from his hair, Harper pointing at some silly shape in the clouds. The afternoon light shifted warmer. Ryan took the wheel, chin set like he believed in good outcomes. Somewhere between 3:43 and 3:47, the expressions changed. The next burst showed Ryan pointing toward the starboard quarter, not smiling, the kind of focus that narrows breathing. In the mirrored trim, Maya froze a reflection, a white cabin cruiser with dark glass riding their wake a little too perfectly. She cued a 47-second video. Wind hissed against the mic. Olivia's voice wavered. "Poor they." Ryan didn't answer, not in words. The camera zoomed, jittery. 2 men on the foredeck, caps down. One held something to his face. It could have been binoculars, could have been a camera. The video stuttered, then stopped as if a hand had pressed pause on time itself. Maya tried 3 recovery passes and marked the corruption point. "That's all the video gives us," she said. Collins nodded once, as if limits were still a kind of information. Fragments of text appeared next. At 3:43 p.m., weird boat following us. At 3:51, turning back. The message indicators showed attempts, not receipts. Mark stared at the word back until it went out of meaning. Maya opened a still no one had taken from Olivia's phone. The metadata said received via share. The angle came from water level, framed like a hunter's blind, 8 adults laughing on a deck, unaware they were being seen. No face of the photographer. No attribution. The hair rose on Mark's arms and stayed there. Another photograph from earlier in the day caught Ryan and Miguel leaning over the engine compartment. Ryan cradled a black square no bigger than a matchbox, edges hard, body sealed. He looked cautious and curious at once. Maya zoomed until the pixels gave up. "Likely a tracker," she said. "Industrial grade. Magnet mount. This shape is common." It wasn't an accusation. It was a door. Mark decided he couldn't breathe inside the van anymore. He asked Collins for 2 hours and a list of the families in town. He drove in a line that made sense if you didn't sleep. At the Morrison place, Linda brought out a shoebox of normal ticket stubs, a chip tea mug, a lanyard with faded security badges. A week before the trip, Jake had taken a call from someone claiming to be the marina's insurance desk. The man asked about driver's license numbers and who else would be on board. Jake said he was helpful. Linda whispered, like using the past tense might wake something. At the Reeves house, David described a break in the night before departure. The garage door ajar, life jackets moved, nothing stolen. "She nearly canceled," he said. "She didn't want to be dramatic." Harper's roommate remembered a friend request from a profile with no face and 200 photos of Table Rock Lake from every angle possible, each image crisp and cold. The account vanished the next day. Priya's sister had written down a plate number from a van parked down the block for 3 days, dark blue or black, windows tinted. When she called it in, the patrol car arrived an hour too late to see anything. At the Martinez home, Rosa handed Mark a business card she'd saved because mothers keep strange things when the world goes wrong. Victor Hale, Ozark Marine Recovery. The cardstock had a weight that wanted to be trusted. He said he was verifying policies. Maria translated, watching Mark's face the way people watch weather. By sunset, Mark's notebook had gone from neat to cramped. The pages showed a pattern he didn't want but had expected: pretext calls, quiet surveillance, a circle drawn around the group before they ever left the dock. He stopped in a parking lot with his forehead against the steering wheel and thought about the tracker in their boat's wiring and the words scratched into gel coat. He thought about Ryan learning to notice things, about the way his brother's curiosity had always had consequences. Back at the marina, Maya had coaxed something else from the phone, several airdrop handshakes that didn't connect, like someone nearby had tried to push files, then changed their mind. One sender ID read, North Shore. Another was numbers only. Mark wrote both down. He didn't ask how many more might be hiding in Bluetooth caches on other devices in other pockets. He knew how networks look when they think they're invisible. They pulled up the website for Ozark Marine Recovery on a deputy's tablet. Clean design. Sober colors. A gallery of reclaimed hulls set in neat rows at a yard with no address, only an email and a P.O. box. Hale's bio was a resume that had been ironed. Mark zoomed out on a hero image and felt his stomach go cold. In the background, past the tidy display of saves, he caught the faint outline of reed beds he had drifted through that morning. Sheriff Collins called for quiet and started assigning tasks. She spoke of subpoenas and custodial holds, of securing the runabout where it sat and posting a deputy who didn't mind being uncomfortable. She requested a dark vehicle for Mark and told him not to go home. Her tone made the warning kind, which only sharpened it. "They're already moving boats," Evan said again, and no one argued. Mark looked at the lake and thought it had a memory after all, just not a conscience. When his phone buzzed, the number showed as unknown, and the text was a single sentence: "Stop counting. We already did." Victor Hale's house didn't hide. It gleamed. Steel and glass set back from Lakeshore Drive with a private dock stitched into a cove that seemed to curve protectively around it. The afternoon sun turned every window into a mirror. From the road, it looked like money washing itself. From the tree lean where Mark crouched, it looked like a plan with a driveway. He waited until Hale's white pickup backed out, blinker lazy, no hurry, and faded south. 10 more minutes for confidence. Then Mark cut through the pines and stepped onto composite planks that didn't creak. The water below the dock moved as one sheet. 2 slips sat side by side. One held a low-profile speedboat, engines cowled, hull waxed like it believed in trophies. The other slip held a runabout with a dent by the bow rail that put heat behind Mark's eyes. He didn't need the registration. The blue trim had faded a notch, but the history hadn't. He took photos from the dock first, wide to tight. He caught the scuff patterns on the rub rail, the new cleat bolts, the fact that someone had scrubbed algae out of the non-skid with a soft brush and pride. He saw himself reflected in the windshield and stepped back until he was only a shape. He boarded quietly, weight low, knees soft, the way mechanics step when they don't want parts to talk. The interior smelled like cleaner and lake rot. He worked left to right, letting his hands remember Ryan's habits. Under the port console, his fingers found the hard rectangle again, a tracker with its magnet foot worn to silver. He snapped a photo that captured the serial etched shallow. He left the unit where it was. In the stern locker, beneath a neat arrangement of Type 2 vests he knew his brother would have mocked, he found a waterproof case with latches you could open in the dark. Inside lay laminated documents and a list on heavy stock written in a hand that didn't rush. 8 names, his brothers among them, each scored through with a thick red line. Beneath, another set of 8 with dates penciled for October, Westfield University Sailing Club, written at the top like an event title. Mark put the paper back exactly where it had rested in the imprint of its own pressure. He moved to the helm and checked the fuse block. New zip ties. Fresh labels. Someone had made the boat obedient again. In the gel coat near the bilge hatch, the letters remained. He pressed the heel of his hand over the carving and felt the raised burr like a splinter that belonged to a voice. He took his photos and made himself breathe. A truck door slammed above the cove. Tires rolled over gravel with that specific hiss. Mark looked up and saw sun flash off the windshield through the trees. The pickup had returned sooner than the clock owed him. He swallowed air that wasn't there and slid off the swim platform, into water that shocked breath from his chest. The dock was set high. He pulled himself into shadow and wrapped one arm through a cross brace. He tucked his chin and listened to his pulse thud in his ears. Footsteps on the boards, unhurried, as if the owner liked the rhythm of his own weight. The steps paused directly overhead. A voice carried down between planks, casual as conversation in a quiet kitchen. "Mark Calder," the voice said. "You don't know when to stop." Hale spoke like he was smiling. Mark didn't move. He stared at the dock post and let his lungs complain inside his ribs. A moment later, something heavy splashed nearby, rope whispering over wood as a concrete block sank straight and fast. The line brushed his shoulder. Hale let out a small amused sound. "Curiosity keeps you afloat," he said. "Until it doesn't." The footsteps continued toward the end of the dock, paused again, then retreated. A door closed up the hill. Silence took shape. Mark counted to 40, because 40 was the number his father used when silt clouded a mask and panic felt like instructions. He eased out from under the dock and climbed the ladder with fingers that didn't want to meet cold air. He crossed the planks and ran the pines in a zigzag that made no sense to anyone watching and made sense to his legs. He reached his truck, sat behind the wheel, and let the adrenaline drain until his hands were his again. He drove to the sheriff's office with the windows down, as if air could erase a voice. Inside the lobby, the bulletin board still carried missing posters that had softened at the corners from too many staples. Through the glass wall of the investigations bullpen, Mark saw a scene that rearranged everything he thought he could count on. Hale sat across from Detective Randall Pierce with his jacket off and his tie loose, an empty chair angled toward them like it had been used. Pierce was laughing, the kind of laugh you practice to sound normal. Hale leaned back like a man inside his own living room. A coffee ring stained a manila folder on the desk between them. Hale's hands were still very clean. Mark stepped backward until he felt the lobby door on his shoulders. Sheriff Collins had insisted on integrity as a posture, and here was a picture that bent it. He took a photo through the glass and hated himself for the way his hand shook, the way his breath fogged the pain and almost spoiled the shot. He didn't think about what it meant for reports, for evidence, for his safety. He only thought about a list of names on heavy stock and a new set of dates that were closer than the calendar deserved. The text arrived before he cleared the parking lot. A single pin drop on a map of the south arm of the lake, and 3 words that made his mouth taste like battery again. Bring your brother's notes. Mark didn't go home. He drove to his workshop, pulled the door down, and laid everything out like parts of an engine you only get to assemble once. The list on heavy stock, the tracker's serial, the text with the pin drop, the photo he hated of Hale and Detective Pierce sharing the same air. He copied Ryan's research from the old flash drive onto 3 new ones, labeled them with a marker that bled a little, and sealed each in a zip bag. He wrote a cover sheet that read like a war plan: insurance payouts under clear skies, salvage cases handled by the same operator, witness disappearances that overlapped holiday weekends, airdrop handshakes labeled North Shore, a yard with rows that looked more like filing than rescue. He added his logs, timestamps, coordinates, people, the tone of their voices. He didn't embellish. He didn't have to. He left one package at his mother's door with a note that said, "If I don't call by noon, drive this to the FBI office in Springfield. Do not hand it to anyone in uniform unless the badge says federal." He watched from the street until the porch light flicked on, then off. He felt the click of something committing in his chest. Sheriff Collins agreed to meet not at the station but in the back of a hardware store where the owner owed her a favor. She listened while Mark outlined what Hale wanted and how close he'd come to being an accident. She didn't argue his story into smaller pieces. She borrowed the flash drive long enough to image it and returned it without a smudge. Then she slid him a number on a torn receipt and told him to speak only once and say only the words she wrote down: requesting federal intake, maritime salvage fraud and disappearances, urgent. He made the call in the alley by a stack of pallets that smelled like rain. A voice took his name and told him to wait for a follow-up. It arrived 20 minutes later from Special Agent Lauren Ortega, who didn't explain credentials over the phone, just asked for a quiet place and a copy of everything. They met in the empty church hall across from the courthouse. Ortega wore boots that made no sound on wax tile and asked questions in a way that sorted noise from signal. When Mark mentioned the reed beds and the yard, she didn't blink. She asked for the model of Evan's drone, the app build, the metadata chain. She wrote geofence and cell pings near marsh and utility truck plates in a small block script. She said, "Hale's text is bait. Show up on your terms or not at all." The "or not at all" felt like a dare. Mark chose his terms. He texted Hale back a decoy time and saved the real coordinates for the people with badges that would hold. Ortega's team went to work fast enough to scare him. A judge signed geofence warrants that drew invisible boxes around the North Marsh and 3 marinas. Carriers would return anonymized device IDs present during windows that mattered. Another order pulled purchase records for magnet-mounted GPS units sold within 100 miles over 2 years. Collins called in favors from anglers who run high-end fish finders. The lake community lent out SD cards full of sidescan logs, each one a stitched map of the bottom where anomalies hide, the kind of citizen data no one thinks to ask for until the bottom turns into a ledger. A volunteer rescue crew rolled a trailer with a portable multi-beam sonar and a LiDAR rig they use for storm debris. The cove lit up in point clouds and clean lines. Even without a live feed, you could feel the grid tightening. Pierce called Mark 3 times and left 2 voicemails that sounded like friendship forced through a small hole. Mark didn't respond. He forgot to sleep. He cleaned the cylinder of his father's .38 because he could control that and very little else. He wrote down distances in yards because feet felt too intimate. Ortega handed him a small recorder no bigger than a key fob and explained in even tones how to start and when to stop. She said, "If he moves you toward a boat, you turn around and walk. We'll take the exposure." Her eyes held. She was not romantic about risk. She was not interested in letting a civilian be a martyr for chain of custody. Dawn opened clean. Collins parked an unmarked unit a quarter-mile from Hale's driveway. 2 federal cars sat deeper in the trees, engines off, radios whispering. Evans sent up the drone with a new memory card and a flight plan that kept it legal but useful. Ortega's team staged at the church hall with laptops blooming into maps and grids. Mark carried 1 flash drive in his jacket and the recorder in his pocket. He left his phone in the glove box because he didn't want anyone tracing the most loyal thing on him. He walked down the road and felt both watched and invisible, the way you feel the second before a storm breaks and the pressure tells you it's here, not coming. Hale opened the door like a host who had timed the coffee to the conversation. He looked like his website, pressed sleeve, controlled smile, the kind of tan you get from other people's boats. He waved Mark inside and said, "Let's keep this between men who understand the water." Mark set the flash drive on the edge of the counter and didn't let go. Hale's eyes clicked. He wanted ownership without fingerprints. He began to talk, a low, smooth proof of life. He used words like liability and recovery efficiencies and keeping lakes clean. He never said loss. He never said people. When he mentioned arranging the narrative and closing loops, Mark's hand found the recorder in his pocket and pressed. Outside, a drone tracked a white pickup easing toward the south arm where the pin drop pulsed on Mark's nerves like a wound. Inside, Hale opened a drawer on the island and paused, just long enough for Mark to register it, then eased it closed and smiled like they had both passed a test. Ortega's text arrived on Mark's old flip phone, the only thing he'd kept that couldn't be mirrored by a stranger. Hold position. Yard being served. Pierce en route to Hale residence without dispatch. Mark didn't turn his head. He said, "You still want my brother's notes?" and watched Hale measure that sentence for threats and opportunities. Hale's answer was quiet enough to make the refrigerator hum sound like rain. The front door latch clicked, and the next decision would decide whether the story ended in a kitchen or on the water. The latch clicked, and Victor Hale didn't flinch. He had the look of a man who expected arrivals to favor him. "You brought what I asked?" he said, eyes on the flash drive like it might sprout legs. Mark kept his voice even. "I brought enough." Hale's gaze dipped toward the island drawer he'd teased open before. Mark's thumb found the recorder again, the small, comforting push. Outside, tires whispered on gravel. A second set of footsteps reached the porch, heavier, impatient. Detective Randall Pierce stepped in without knocking, the kind of entitlement you practice when doors keep opening. He saw Hale. He saw Mark. Something flickered between calculation and relief. "We can resolve this," Pierce said too quickly. Mark felt the scene tilt. He thought of reed beds and ordered rows. He thought of Ryan's name scored through in red. Words came out of him like ballast. "You've both been moving boats in the dark," he said. "You both forgot what the lake remembers." Pierce's jaw tightened. "You need to calm down," he offered, palm out, cop simple. Hale's smile stayed laminated. "Men who understand the water," he repeated, as if the phrase could float them. The kitchen tightened to a point. Hale's hand went to the drawer. Mark stepped back, not dramatic, just decisive. The front door flew again. Special Agent Lauren Ortega crossed the threshold first, side on, voice plain and strong. Federal agents. Behind her, 2 agents fanned left and right, precise without theater. Pierce froze mid-syllable, the posture of a man who just realized he'd walked into someone else's script. Hale didn't freeze. He tried to finish the move he'd started. The drawer came open a handspan. Ortega saw the angle, the touch, the shift of weight. "Don't," she said, and there was old steel in it. Everything sped and slowed at once. Mark heard his heartbeat and the refrigerator and a J outside and the click of trained thumbs. Hale made the wrong choice. He drew not with panic, but with the confidence of practice. Mark didn't wait to read the end of that sentence. He pulled his father's .38 and fired once, not to finish but to stop. The round hit Hale high in the shoulder, turned him, and sent his weapon to the tile. He crashed against the counter, grabbing at the edge with his good hand, breath shocked loud. Ortega moved, kicked Hale's pistol away, and the room exhaled into command voice and cuffs and rights that sounded like salvation. In the aftermath, detail took over. A paramedic sealed Hale's wound, efficient, impersonal. Pierce stood mutely as an agent removed his badge and weapon. On the kitchen island, the flash drive sat where Mark had placed it, ordinary as a key. Ortega looked at him then, not like a savior, not like a reckless witness, but like a man who had made a necessary choice at the worst possible time. "We'll need that recording," she said. Mark handed it over with the steadiness that returns when someone else finally carries part of the weight. By afternoon, subpoenas hit like weather. The yard behind Hale's shell company opened under federal warrant. Drones mapped the grid from above while multi-beam sonar and community sidescan logs stitched a below-water atlas that pointed where spades should go. Geofence returns lit up with familiar device IDs that loved the marsh on nights when insurance claims sprouted. A storage unit 2 counties over gave up binders labeled like a business plan: loss mitigation, asset recovery, narrative control. The pages didn't confess. They described. That was worse and better for court. Search dogs worked the fringe of the south arm, noses low, tails telling truths handlers already feared. Crews set up shade tents and portable lights, methodical, respectful. The press learned enough to speculate without names. Sheriff Collins stood at a podium and didn't overreach. She thanked partners, asked for patience, declined to answer questions meant to inflame. In the crowd, families stood in a loose cluster, protective of one another in new, radical ways. Mark kept his distance until he couldn't. He found Linda Morrison, and they didn't speak for a full minute. Some debts only silence pays. Months stretched into a year of casework. In 2024, federal indictments landed across 6 states. Fraudulent salvage, conspiracy, obstruction, violent crimes tied to waterways. People Mark had never met walked out of offices with their jackets on their arms. Pierce took a deal and an orange jumpsuit. 2 marina managers changed their minds about silence. The network didn't look like a movie. It looked like spreadsheets and handshakes and late-night toes that never made the ledger. The plea agreements used polite words that still meant what they meant. The sentencing came in 2026, in a courtroom where the air felt colder than outside. Hale stood like a man in a suit he didn't own. The judge read life without parole in a tone that did not climb or fall. Families spoke if they wanted to, or didn't if they couldn't. Mark read from Ryan's notebook, a paragraph about currents and patience and how water tells the truth if you stop trying to make it lie. Outside, Table Rock Lake lay flat. It didn't glow. It didn't punish. It held. The memorial happened at dusk. Kayaks drifted in a quiet flotilla, each with a light clipped to the bow. A hymn rose from someone who remembered the words. The names: Ryan, Olivia, Ben, Tasha, Miguel, Harper, Jordan, Priya, moved across the water without breaking it. Mark let the last of the day sit on his shoulders like a warm towel. He looked at his mother's hand on his sleeve and the way grief had not shrunk her. He felt Ryan like a pole and, for once, not an undertow.